is, like I said, they'll have an idea and they'll think that is the only idea and it's the best idea. We've all heard it. I mean, it's the typical guitar player who's the producer, or the vocalist who's the producer, or the drummer who's the producer. They'll make sure that the fill that they made is the best, is the fucking loudest thing in the turnaround, when I would just be like, that fill is too fucking loud, I'm going to cut it. See the difference? Like, fuck that fill. It gets in the way of the vocal. So you can hear it. It's not impossible to hear. You can hear it when I get a song that is one of those situations where the producer is the artist, is the engineer, did the mix, fucking reads the contracts. You can hear it from 10 miles away. And be honest with you, they're the worst people to work with, because you have to convince them that their ideas are not all genius. And I don't need a new idea every 2 bars. I just need to make sure the vocal has impact on my heart. And that's beautiful. That's all I care about. I don't give a shit about the drum fill. I don't. I'm always blown away, because in the past, I remember working with a producer who was a big shot producer, and he was from the UK, and he came, and I was like very young engineer, and I was, hired to work with him, and that dude, he spent 4 hours on the snare drum, man. 4 hours on the snare drum. And in fact, the next day, he spent another hour on the snare drum. That taught me immediately, fuck the snare drum. Snare drum is not the song. But because he was the producer, the artist, and he recorded it, the snare drum was the most important thing. Was it a hit? Right into the trash. It's just not, it's not a smart thing to do, because you're not focusing. I'm lucky enough to be hired, not because I get the best kick drum sound, not because I get the best vocal sound, although my vocals are fucking awesome. But I'm hired because of my taste, because I will say to the producer, yeah, that's not that important. It's good. It's brilliant. You could make a whole song out of that 4 bars that you created, in the middle of the night one night. But it doesn't make this spot more impactful. In fact, it's distracting. And that's generally what happens, is people who work by themselves all the time can be brilliant, but they can also just create shit that's not impactful because they're focusing on the wrong things. I mean, think about the people who did it well. Prince, always brilliant. Did he have awesome ideas? Always. But they were crystallized ideas. Always. They were never wasteful. That's what's important. Another question.
What are some of the things that you can do to translate across all platforms, like small speakers, large speakers, iPads, MacBooks, stuff like that?
Say it louder.
What are some of the things that you can do to translate the sound across all speakers, across all spectrums?
Okay. So did everybody hear the question? So as I mentioned just a minute ago, I listen to all kinds of speakers. I listen to Bluetooth speakers. I listen to big fancy PMC jams. I listen to, my old shitty tannoys. I listen to speakers with fucked up amps. I listen to anything I can listen to. And that's how I do it. I just pay attention. And I try to make sure that my mix has the impact on anything. Now, is the bass going to be perfect on everything? It's not. It's not going to happen. But there are some parameters that have to translate no matter what it is. And of course, those parameters change based on the kind of music I'm working on. So basically, I spend a lot of time in different speakers, and I know the parameters of the genres that I work on, right? Depending on what genre it is, those parameters change, right? And I know those parameters, and I pay attention to those parameters. And I listen to lots of different speakers. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks for being here, Tony. I just wanted to get
louder.
Thanks for being here first.
Thanks.
I got to hear you. I went to LA Film School. You probably won't remember, but it was several years ago. You came and talked to my class. It's good to be able to sit here and hear you speak again. I wanted you to just say anything to listening level with mixing, as far as listening at low levels and listening at high levels. I get fatigued a lot quick at high levels, obviously. I just want you to say anything about that, as far as like how much time you spend with the levels lower as opposed to cranking it.
Absolutely. Everybody heard the question? So I spent a lot of time at different levels. I spent a lot of time on different speakers and at different levels. And some speakers I use just for loud, and then I might work for 5 hours, going on just 2 speakers. And then I'll start using those 2 speakers at different volumes, right? So I really try to change it up a lot. I listen in mono a lot. Listening in mono is really revealing because it lines up those most important things: your vocal, your snare drum, your kick, your bass. It lines all that stuff up for you. It also shows you what your big wide things are really going to sound like when somebody isn't listening in headphones, right? Because we all love to create big wide spread things, but if you put it in mono, most of the time it's gone. The volume goes down significantly on the widest things that you've created. I pay attention in mono quite a lot, and in different volumes, and I mean very soft volumes. I think Bob Clearmountain is going to come up at some point, maybe tomorrow, or I don't know what day, but he's probably on that list. So I never assisted Bob, but I assisted his assistant. So in those days, when there was a big artist in the studio, they needed 2 assistants. One to just run around and get stuff and move tapes around, or help with aligning the tape machine. And the other one was obviously the guy who sat there and was in the session. And of course, I was very interested to know what Bob did, everything Bob did. We all were. And I remember asking the assistant engineer, what volume did Bob listen to? And he was like, he played the song and turned it to the volume that Bob was listening. And I swear to God, I couldn't hear anything. It was like a whisper. And I was like, I don't believe you. You're lying to me. And then one day I came in after, Bob had just gotten up and he was talking on the phone or something like that. And the music was playing, and it was playing at that low volume. And I was like, how can he possibly work at that volume? So ever since then, now I force myself to listen at a really low volume. And in honesty, it exposes things again that you didn't know existed. We all know that high volume is the worst. Do not mix at high volume. That's the worst thing you can do. It's fine when the clients come and you crank it up and they feel the bass and the kick and everybody's loving it. Great. But don't mix there. And even when they ask, as they're listening at that volume, and they say, hey, can you raise the vocal? You say no. I'm telling you, no is the answer. bring it down, listen at the proper volume. Do you still feel the vocal is too low? That's what you got to do. Don't let anybody make decisions at 120 dB. That's not going to be of any value to anybody, really. That's a waste of time. So, yeah, I listen to a lot of different volumes in a lot of different ways. And Bob Clearmountain was the one that I tried to emulate there. Go ahead.
Before mixing a track, what do you listen for exactly? Like,
say it louder.
Before mixing a track, what do you listen for exactly? Like, are you listening for anything specific, or are you coming up with ideas right off the bat?
Sure. Everybody heard the question? So, as I said, what I try to do before I start mixing is just come up with ideas. And some of those ideas are in my head, and some of those ideas I literally write down what I'm going to do. I'm going to patch this here. I'm going to send it there. I'm going to put it at this, attack or that release. Or I'm going to, I'm going to put a lo-fi on it and put it at, 8-bit or whatever it is I'm going to do. And I'll have all these ideas either written down or I'll have them worked out in my head. And then I just keep playing it over and over because all I'm looking for is what's the good bits. I'll tell you another story. I don't want to go too long, but I remember one time I was working with, I was a very young engineer, very young mixer, and this client came from Sweden. And they asked me to mix, I think I was mixing like 5 songs. And so they brought, put up, this was back in the tape and consoles and everything. So, they put up the tape, we ran the tape, I played it maybe 6, 7, 8 times, just listening with them while we're talking. And they're telling me all about how they want it to sound and all this and that. And while they're talking, I'm listening and I'm coming up with ideas, right? This is the level at which you got to be able to do this. So, they go in the other room, I sit down, and I just start listening for things. What's this? What's that? What's this? By the time they came back in the room, out of 48 tracks, or let's say out of 24, because 24 of them were the track, and the other tape was the 24 track was the vocals. Out of the 24 tracks, I only had 14 faders up. And they were like, so they came in and I was like, this is it. This is your song right here. This is what we're mixing. And they were like, wait a minute, what about all this? And I was like, that's extra. We'll use that for fills or turnarounds or whatever it is. But we don't need anything from those going from top to bottom. So working out your arrangement as well is part of the whole process, right? As you're mixing, those of you, because all of you all raise your hands as producers. Your producers, your engineers, your artists, your writers, your publishers, your lawyers, everybody in front of me right now, right? Well, part of production is arranging. And part of taste is arranging, right? And arranging means deciding what comes in where, what it sounds like is part of the mixing part. So all of that is what I'm working out in my head. And some of those ideas came from when I used to work years ago, with dance remixers. And dance remixers used to just play the track over and over. And then they would automate, they would run the automation live and automate shit. And then we'd play it back and be like, oh, that section is really cool. Let's tweak that. And we'd tweak that section. And then we'd print that. And then they'd get rid of all that automation and do it again and see whatever cool things came up. But all the while, they've got ideas in their head. And part of my training was that. So while I'm playing it, I'm coming up with arrangement ideas. I'm coming up with anything that makes the song more impactful. I'm not sure that was a good answer, but another question. Yeah.
How do you stay on top of changes that happen in the marketplace?
Sorry, louder. It's really loud here.
How do you stay on top of changes that happen in the marketplace, like genre changes and over time throughout your career, keep on track of trends?
Yeah. Everybody hear the question? How do you stay on top? How do you stay on top of the trends? There's two ways. One is practice, right? That thing that I was talking about earlier about practice, that's exceedingly important to this day. Last night I was like setting up for one of my other seminars, and I found myself spending hours just practicing with a particular sound on a particular, going through various sets of plugins and trying things out. So practice is one thing that I do quite often. The other thing is I pay attention to, I'm lucky enough to have a great team of young assistants and other collaborators, engineers that I work with, who I pay attention to, and they play me music. And I listen to that music and ask them, what did they do? Just the same way they ask me, what do I do? And I pay attention to what they did on their work. And that is really important. Obviously, just listening to my colleagues, sitting down, listening to one of Manny's mixes, or listening to one of Dave Pensato's, or Jason Joshua, or anybody who's out there doing top mixes, Serban. Just paying attention to what they're doing, because you can never. I used to spend a lot of time writing down. I would literally sit with, say a Bob Clearmountain mix or, a Mick Gazowski mix, and I would just write down. This is another way of practicing, by the way. I would sit down and write what I thought they did. So I would try to figure out what kind of reverb they used and what kind of pre-delay it was and what else they were doing. And I would try to write down exactly what they did. And this really helped me. I'm sure that what I wrote down had nothing to do with what they did. But what it did was it created ideas in my head of how to get across, a vocal or how to get an idea done. So I would spend a lot of time listening, writing down ideas, and listening to new music. That's really important. So, another question.
Hi, Tony. When do you think is a good time for a producer or songwriter like me to stop the song so we can share that with a co-producer or an engineer?
When do you think the point is where you should back away?
Right, because you're talking about bringing the songs to somebody else, to collaborate to especially because we want to be part of the sound design environment or that kind of stuff, but we want to bring it to someone like you as a producer, as an artist. When do you think is a good time to let that go? Okay.
Did everybody hear the question? So when do you as a writer or an artist or a writer-artist, a co-producer, when is it time to step away? Day one. If you can afford it, day one. If you're a writer and you're making money, hire an engineer. There's no reason why you should be recording your own vocal. There's no reason why you should be expressing your emotions and explaining your ideas, not sitting there tweaking on a synth. I mean, you could do that, obviously, if you're really quick at it. But to me, the process starts right away. You should be including other people right away from the start of the process. Have collaborators, have engineers. I mean, obviously, I believe there should be an engineer in every session in the world, because there's no reason why any creator should be thinking about cables, should be thinking about mic height, should be thinking about how that mic should be set up. You should only be thinking about emoting. You should only be thinking about, getting your breath ready to sing the part. This is what you should be thinking about as an artist. The engineer should be thinking about the cables, the mic height, the mic selection, the preamp selection. So the answer is right away. If you can afford it, right away. Hire an engineer. And then obviously, where do you bring in a producer? I mean, nowadays, writing is collaboration with a producer. Most of the artists I work with go into a writing session with a producer. And after 3 hours, they come out with a demo. And that demo has drums and a bunch of instruments on it. So, as soon as the process can start, I think it's valuable. I really do. For those of you who want to be artists, who want to be producers, collaborate. If you're going to be a producer, you should have an engineer as soon as possible in the process. Because as a producer, you shouldn't be worried about fucking connectors and plugins and stuff like that. So, one more question before I take a quick break. Yeah? Do we have a microphone over there?
Hi, Tony. I love your Waves plugins. Anyhow, I was just wondering, are you always mixing in stereo, or do you find yourself sometimes mixing in surround sound? And I saw you put your water on the board. I was wondering, would you have a heart attack if somebody else did that? Just out of curiosity. Thanks.
That's 20 plus years experience right there. Not only do I always put my cap back on, I actually have my initials on the cap so I don't share anybody else's saliva. What was the question again? No, really, what was the question? Oh, stereo or surround? Yeah, sorry. I do surround when my arms are twisted, when I'm doing something for a movie, I will do surround. I am a whiner and a complainer about it because, one, doing music for movies means that music is not the most important thing. And I'm used to making the music the most important thing. So it drives me out of my mind to spend weeks on a song and then go see the movie and hear it so low under dialogue. And, all that time I spent trying to make that beautiful sounding wide song in the stereo and reverbs over here and this and that. And then you go and see the movie and it's so low, it doesn't matter. So my experience with surround is with movies, and my experience with movies is that music is less important. And for me, anything that makes the music less important, they need to pay me more for that. Because it's hard for me to do. So I don't really care about surround. I don't care about it as a listener, because I don't know who the hell has 7 speakers, 10 speakers, 25 speakers. I don't get it. I think it's lovely. I think it's amazing. I go to the PMC booth and listen to their Atmos and think, this is awesome. I wish I could afford to have this in my garage. I really would listen there once every year when we were watching a movie. But I don't live like that. My life is moving all the time. I'm listening to my favorite songs in the car. I'm listening while I'm making dinner. I'm listening on TV. I'm listening in headphones. I don't have a life where I can listen to my favorite album, like this. I can't do it. So it doesn't make me happy to do that. I want my music to be great everywhere. And the idea of making music for movies is wonderful. I think it's the people who do it well are amazing at it because they've created a life around the sound effects, the dialogue, and the Foley. And I've not created a life that way. My life is around the music and the impact of the music. So it's a little more difficult for me to make and care about surround. So I'm going to take a quick little break and try to set something up over here, and maybe 5-10 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and talk some more, maybe, for a little while. I don't know what time it is, but...